It was extremely debilitated. I couldn't walk anymore. I had to actually have people make me food and give it to me. I stayed in my room and I was not even bedbound, I was floorbound because the bed would actually make my symptoms worse. And at this point, I had like 30 different symptoms. But the main debilitating one was still that. And the moving, I had a lot of shifting in my bones and all this stuff. Like I would cough and my ribs would all like thud and shift. And it was really weird. Since I was experiencing so many other symptoms, I almost didn't really take those as seriously. Basically, what started to happen was whenever I was about 16 years old, I had a very symptomatic situation going on. I was starting to experience a lot of symptoms of something that was incredibly mysterious. Let's just put it that way. I was sitting in my chemistry class one day and I started to get sensation of butterflies in my stomach as if I were nervous, but I knew that I wasn't nervous. It was something that came on physically without any apparent stimulus. That actually further started a feedback loop where it actually did scare me a little bit, and then it caused that symptom to get worse. So it basically spiraled into what I later inferred to be a panic attack, and I hadn't ever experienced one before. I had to leave the classroom, and I didn't know what had happened. It was only until I went home afterwards and realized what it actually was. It was a panic attack. I thought that it was just a fluke. It was really weird, and I didn't know if it was because I was sick or something, or I was coming down with something. I didn't really think anything of it, but things did not go away. They started to get worse, actually. I started to experience things like, POTS symptoms, where I would just stand up and I would have an elevated heart rate and slightly elevated blood pressure as well. No matter how much sleep I would get, more sleep would help that, but it wouldn't completely alleviate it. And no matter how much sleep that I would get, I still had some extant symptoms, and that was a big issue for me. The most debilitating symptom that started to come on was a symptom of experiencing extreme pain, actually, when experiencing any emotion, whether it be positive or negative, and whether it be severe or light. It was a debilitating thing where I wouldn't be able to remain standing. I'd buckle almost, and I would have to sit down. Now, over the course of the next few months, I was missing lots of school. But then during the lockdowns, I actually got a job. And there's a story behind why that happened. And I mean, shockingly, I got a job during lockdowns when everyone was losing their jobs. But I actually decided to go to work because there's a part of me that always wants to feel normal, even if I'm not. So I wanted to be working. And also, even if I have a good excuse to not work or to not engage in something, I have a work ethic to a fault almost, where I feel guilty even if I have a reason to stay away from doing work. I still do that to this day. um, that's why I ended up going to work. But unfortunately, it was wearing me down even more and more. And during this time, once again, I'm trying to figure out what's been going on with me, and I can't figure it out. Doctors can't figure it out either. I had gotten every test done under the sun, including a GI scope, where they put a camera down and see what's going on, because I had the pain down here. And nothing, everything came back normal, quote unquote. I was, of course, told that maybe I have anxiety, because if there's no apparent symptoms or, disease process, but the person is reporting something like that, then it must be psychiatric, is sort of the thing that they're trained to do. So I was also told that by parts of some of my friends and parts of my family. And so that also elicited me it made me want to go to work even more. And I started to almost sort of believe them subconsciously. Anyone that's been sick and has been told that before, they'll know exactly what that feels like. I started going to work, and then for a year, I worked there, and then I got another job. It was a lot more leisurely, and I thought that would help me, but unfortunately, it seemed like the damage was already done, and so I was already on my last, thread there until January of 22. I actually had to go on leave. I was extremely debilitated. I couldn't walk anymore. I had to actually have people make me food and give it to me. I stayed in my room, and I was not even bedbound, I was floorbound because the bed would actually make my symptoms worse. And at this point, I had like 30 different symptoms. But the main debilitating one was still that. And the moving, I had a lot of shifting in my bones and all this stuff. Like I would cough, and my ribs would all like thud and shift, and it was really weird. But since I was experiencing so many other symptoms, I almost didn't really take those as seriously. So it was like a subconscious thing where I didn't pay as much attention to those as I should have. all I wanted to do was just get better and figure out what was going on with me. So during that, I'd say 4 month period from January to April, I did even more studying and reviewing. I came across a post on Instagram, and it was from someone that I frankly vehemently disagree with now that I know what I know. But he did post something that I think actually indirectly saved my life. It was something about vagus nerve inflammation. So if people don't know what your vagus nerves are, you have two of them, and vagus is Latin for wandering, which is a fitting name because they go from your neck all the way throughout your body. They regulate, they're basically the median between your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. If you have inflammation of the nerves, then it can cause a variety of issues that usually are due to an overly sympathetic state because the nerves are not doing their job as well, calming the body as well as they should be. I looked at all of the symptoms that were listed and I thought, wow, I'm getting, tachycardia. I'm getting brain fog. I'm getting, I'm having issues with my eyes dilating. Actually, if you shone a light on my eyes, what would happen is they would constrict and then they dilate again and then constrict and dilate. And it was not normal. All these symptoms were listed. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But it's one thing to say that you might have vagus nerve inflammation. What causes that though? And so I started, it got me onto my own independent search. I saw things that cause vagus nerve inflammation. And I came across a seminar by a doctor that owns a clinic in Cary Medical, Florida, or in Florida by the name of Cary Medical, Florida. It was on what he calls a vagopathy, wherein you can have a degeneration of the vagus nerve slowly over time, or vagus nerves, from an impingement on your own neck if you have instability. And instability is basically it's characterized by exactly what the name implies, which is your bones are held together by ligaments. And if your ligaments are really weak, whether that's due to trauma, like a car accident or something, or whether that's due to a genetic predisposition to something like that, or malformation or something like that, then the bones can move around too much and they can impinge on surrounding nerves and arteries. He did a whole seminar on it, and it was surrounding CCI, craniocervical instability. So you can have instability anywhere, but he was mainly focusing on the neck in the seminar. And I thought, I watched it, and I actually remember I was at this point like so desperate, and given my way of thinking, even now, I actually grabbed a notebook and I started writing down a bunch of notes. And I was like, I'm going to binge this channel, and I'm going to binge all these seminars. I'm going to write everything down. But before I could even get that many words down, as I was listening and just absorbing the information, I thought, no, this has to be what I have. This has to be it. So I actually scheduled an appointment for an evaluation with them, despite the fact that I live 14 hours away from them in terms of a drive, without telling anyone, even my dad. I told him later, and he said, "Oh, good." I mean, because at this point, he was going into debt trying to fix me and stuff, and it was just, we were both desperate. He knew that something was going on, and I wasn't just making this up. So on April 6th, we drove down, and fortunately, I have a grandmother that lives around there. She lives an hour and a half away from the clinic. If she didn't, then we would have had major issues, really bad issues, because I wouldn't have had a place to stay. We go there and they evaluate me for a lot of this stuff, but mainly CCI. I got validation basically because when they looked at all my scans, and they have TVs in the room so they show everything that they did on you. And they had some very high-tech diagnostics that they did that I've never seen before. The main doctor there, Dr. Hauser, he told me, he said, if you had come any later, you were on your way for something catastrophic. That was word for word what he had said to me. At 18 years old, I can't forget something like that being said to me. But also, I mean, if anyone has been truly sick, they understand that this was actually the most liberating thing to be told. Actually, to be told for years that nothing's wrong with you, and then finally to be told, even if it's serious, here's what's going on. That was extremely relieving. Before I ever even started doing anything, I actually was put on a blood pressure medication, propranolol. Many people have heard of that before, to fix anxiety, right? It was mainly the heart palpitations. So even though it's a blood pressure medication, it can help with tachycardia, like fast heart rate. But all that did was every time that I would have one of those panic attacks again, I was exhibiting all of the symptoms except for a fast heart rate and high blood pressure. It was a really weird thing. It was almost like it wasn't allowed to do it. And that's actually what was going on. But it wasn't fixing the underlying issue then. I was still debilitated. There was that. At 16 years old, I was put on topical testosterone gel because we thought that that might have been an issue hormonally with low testosterone, with like fast heart rate, lower blood pressure, fatigue, all that. Considering my dad is also on TRT, we tried that. That helped the first day that I had it. I remember waking up, I was like, wow, I feel a lot better. It could have been just because I was lower on testosterone given my diet, actually, not directly the lack of testosterone gel. I'm lacking that, like that's not what was happening. I was on a lot of that stuff for a while, but it only covered things up. It was only palliative. And even then, it's hard to even say it was palliative because palliative implies that it was fixing the symptoms. It wasn't really. It was just almost sublimating them into something else. Like it was not actually working the way that they said it would and that I wanted it to. So unfortunate, but that was what I was being told was what I needed. Even by my dad, he didn't say that that was what I needed, but he was like, well, we'll see. I started undergoing treatments there. Now, what does that imply? The treatments there, because this is a condition that can be fully treated regeneratively. It is through a regenerative treatment, and there's two types, and they're very similar. They involve the same type of thing. There's prolotherapy. There's people may not have heard of. Most of the time when I say that, they don't recognize that, but PRP is one that people do often recognize. Both of those are employed at the clinic, and prolotherapy is the most basic one. It's their default. It's the cheapest, and also it is very effective. Prolotherapy just involves taking a syringe, and it's quite large, the needle on there, and they fill the syringe up with a solution of water, dextrose sugar, a plant compound that promotes inflammation, which, leave it to plants to do such a thing, right? And then also, I think there is a slight numbing agent in it. I know there's a 4-ingredient solution. And what they do is they take that and they inject it in between the bones. So right where the ligament is that's injured, to initiate an inflammatory cascade on the area that helps to rebuild the tissue over time. So it's not an immediate fix. You need a few, and depending on how weak the ligaments are, you need more than others. But you need to stimulate inflammation in that area because your ligaments naturally don't have a good blood supply. And so if you damage them, they'll heal maybe a little bit, but usually those are more permanent and you have to intervene with something else. So that's why they do this. We ended up finding out that the reason that my case was so severe was because it wasn't just my neck that was the problem. They'd already said I was in the top 10% of their cases that they had seen, but they also realized that it was my entire body that was affected. I had it that severe in my neck, but also it was that severe everywhere else. So in terms of the percentile that I lie in now, I mean, you can only guess, right? That actually explains my ribs being the way that they were. So my ribs thudding whenever I'd cough and stuff. The pain that I experienced when feeling any emotion was actually because of my ribs being so unstable. And so what would happen is I would experience an emotion and my diaphragm would actually pull on the ribs enough to the point where it impinged on all of the surrounding nerves in my solar plexus. So that's where you feel your emotions in your abdomen and stuff like that. And so I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't listen to music, anything that even sparks a slight emotion that you usually don't even recognize consciously when you're fine. I had to become aware of, and it was debilitating. So that explains all of that. In fact, my ribs still prove to be the part that is still the most severe. I haven't made a full recovery yet, and I'll get to that later. I've made massive strides in that department, though. A lot of people think of PRP as like 1 or 2 injections. This clinic does over 100 every time if you need them. I mean, I'm still not fully fixed, and I've been getting over 100 injections every treatment, and I've gotten almost 40. So that should, tell people or indicate the severity of it to other people. What we have been planning is, now that I've been starting this brand, you could call it, I've been trying to raise enough money for myself alongside my girlfriend to move down to Florida very soon. Optimally, in an ideal world, it would actually be in a few months. That may actually be feasible, but we'll see. I've been waiting, and it's because of the fact that travel fees are incredibly expensive for me. I actually can't fly in planes anyway, which would be cheaper. Problem is that the pressure differences affect my condition, so I can't do that. And also, I need the security of, if I have a flare-up, I can park on the side of the road and take a break. That's the biggest thing. I've gotten about, in total, approaching 40 full treatments, like systemic, whatever. And each time, like, you can feel a difference afterwards. But I haven't had treatment in almost a year. That's because I got to a point where I was good enough functionally to stay home with family. I mean, one of the hardest things when I was undergoing treatments was being away from friends and family. While I was undergoing treatment, I couldn't work, and I was having to stay in Florida with my grandma. Now, unfortunately, as an 18-year-old going on 19 at the time, it made me feel very infantile and juvenile, even though, once again, it's going back to what I said. Even though I had a reason, it doesn't make me feel good that I'm an adult legally and I'm having to live with my grandmother and not have a job, right? And basically stay in my room all day. Given that, I'm not someone that is disposed towards, playing video games to pass the time or something. And so what I ended up doing was I started studying more. I had already been scrolling on Instagram and going into the health space because originally I thought, well, maybe my diet has something to do with what's going on. Before I ever developed any symptoms of anything, and I was just a normal kid going to school like everyone else, I was told multiple times, especially it was starting in 7th and 8th grade, mainly 8th grade. I was told that I needed to eat better, particularly by my dad, though. And it was because he told me my dinners actually consisted of a Knorr pasta side. My diet was very, very bad when I was that young. And I just wanted to eat a bunch of pasta, and that was it. I was told, though, by my dad, I need to eat better, right? You need to eat better. But his idea at the time of eating better was, well, if you're going to eat a pasta side, how about you add vegetables to it? Right? Because that's what we're always told. He went vegan for a minute, but he didn't do it for ethical reasons. He actually thought that it was the healthiest thing. He eventually just added meat back in just because I think he was always emphasizing vegetable consumption and all that stuff. And he believed the whole like seed oils are better for you than saturated fat and animal fat. Of course, he's going to tell me to eat more vegetables. I wasn't going on a specific diet per se. I was just trying to eat what people consider to be a balanced one where you have a lot of things. I was making same thing. I was basing it around a pasta side, but I wasn't just having a pasta side. I was using it as the catalyst for broccoli, green beans, peas, black beans, kidney beans, red bell peppers, orange, yellow bell peppers, green bell pepper. I was putting everything in there. Mushrooms, tomatoes. I was putting everything in there, and it would form this massive bowl. And I'd try and eat the whole thing, and of course I couldn't get everything down. That was dinner. In the mornings, I was having like one of those smoothies that people try and make. Well, they put like a banana and an apple in there, and they have like some other things that I might put in there, like cinnamon or something like that, or PB Fit. That was another thing that I put in there. But I decided, I was like, I don't even care for taste. I'm going to put everything in here that even seems remotely similar. So there's like these RX bars and Lara bars that you can buy from the store. I actually put those in there too. And I mixed everything up. I was putting some Greek yogurt. It didn't taste great. It didn't taste great at all. But I drank it because, I was like, well, this is going to make me feel better. Yeah, no, it actually made me feel worse every single time, including the dinner. So the dinner had all those vegetables in there and a pasta side, but I also had some chicken breast in there. So actually, now that I think about it, I may have been vegan for the most part, at least. It was definitely vegetarian. I was on a vegetarian diet because I would have a chicken breast every single day, but the rest of it was just strictly plants. I never did that on purpose, but that is what ended up happening. I felt very poor on that diet. And I tried different things. I tried like a paleo approach. Then I tried a Whole30 approach. I think the next thing was a lectin-free approach because I had come across Dr. Gundry, and at the time I was strictly following his protocol. To give credit where credit is due, I felt the best on Dr. Gundry's diet than all of the others at the time. So I experienced it with his diet. Throughout the first few months of treatment, I was actually still eating that diet. But then I started scrolling on Instagram more, as we tend to do still, and especially me, given the circumstances. I came across more of Dave Asprey, though. He particularly emphasized the need for animal protein, more animal protein than Dr. Gundry recommends. Dr. Gundry tends to say that it ages us more, animal protein. And I bought into that. If everything else that he was saying was working for me ostensibly, then why wouldn't this, right, be correct? I thought, well, even if Dr. Gundry is correct, I'm an anomaly. I'm undergoing treatments that are directly involved in building up proteins. So I should probably introduce more anyway. So that's what I did. I started eating a pound of grass-fed ground beef a day. Of course, at the time I was draining the fat, but I've learned since then. And 4 eggs a day, actually. So that was already quite a bit. But I was also eating all the plant foods and stuff like that. Yeah, still. I came across more of Paul Saladino. And at the time, I couldn't stand what he was saying. And I was like, he's eating all this fruit and honey. Like that can't be good for you. And at the time, I also thought that much red meat was a problem too. So I thought his diet was like the ultimate recipe for disaster. Right. I actually followed him on Instagram to laugh at his content personally. It was like one of those things where it was entertainment for me. Whether it was a blessing or a curse to do that, the thing that resulted from that was actually me going, huh, actually, you know what? Maybe he's right about this. And I saw a debate between him and Dr. Gundry as well. And I thought, wow, I mean, at least it seems that he has the courage of his own convictions to come on and like talk to an opposing side about this and that. So I thought, you know what? Maybe he's right. So in June, I think of 22, I adopted the meat and fruit diet for 1 month. And the reason for that was because the reason it was so short was because of the fact that it was the only time while I was eating that I came down with increased blood pressure after eating. My face would get red. I'd get sweaty after I ate. Never happened in my entire life. My pulse rate would go up. Now, again, I mean, association doesn't equal causation. I'm kind of known for saying stuff like that all the time. I was undergoing intense treatments. I was also going outside more and getting more sunlight, and that tended to warm me up for the rest of the day. It was interesting. I was like, it was the rest of the day that I felt warmer. Who knows what was contributing? Even if it was the diet, how many other compounding factors were there? I don't know. But I can say that was the only time in my life that after a meal, every single meal, invariably every single day, that I would experience that. And I don't think that was a coincidence. But I was still lost. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I thought he was right. So I was like, well, I mean, what am I supposed to do? Well, fortunately, I came across a video by someone by the name of Bart K on YouTube. And it was actually a reaction video to Paul Saladino. So I was just seeing someone critique Paul. And I was like, well, this is really odd. Do you even have any qualifications to be saying things like this? I mean, you're not dressed professionally. You have like a robe on and a coffee mug in your hand. Like, I don't know. But the more that I listened, and I listened to the whole video eventually, I was like, you know what? That actually makes more sense. And so then I watched another video. And then really after that second video, I was like, I actually sent them to my dad because the more I learned, the more my dad adopted it because, you know, he was just listening to what I was looking at and stuff. I sent it to him and I was like, tell me what you think about this guy because I think that he's onto something. He said, no, he makes a lot more sense than Paul. I had my questions about him and I said, so did I. So very, very quickly, actually, I adopted a carnivore diet that was bereft of any significant carbohydrates to speak of. So the first week or two, I had a sweet potato alongside it while I was having ground beef and eggs and some steak. I wasn't emphasizing the grass-fed or the grain-fed distinction at the time. It was just meat was the thing that I was focusing on, and maybe like a handful of walnuts before I actually cut those things out, which was probably a good thing because of the transition period that's important to kind of get to do slowly so that you don't have extreme adverse effects. We know that you're getting these treatments that are helping immensely, very clearly, considering I made a lot of progress. I'm no longer absolutely debilitated floor bound, you know, and I'm able to engage in resistance training and stuff like that. The diet at first, whenever I had adopted it, I think it may have made me feel better, but given the fact that these treatments induce inflammation, I was chronically inflamed always. The carnivore diet wasn't going to immediately fix that with a lot of, like it does with most other people that are having a condition that is causing inflammation, but that the carnivore diet fixed, right? That's not what was going on with me. I was continuing to eat it though, because I believed that it was the appropriate diet for me to eat. So I was like, well, there's no better diet that I'm going to get to eat. So I might as well do this. It was only until about a year or two, it was about a year later when I decided to finally test my luck a little bit, I guess, and transgress from the diet. It was Christmas of last year. Once that happened, so September of 2022, it was until Christmas, like I said, that I was actually strict carnivore. I was 100% strict, and I was almost afraid to actually transgress. I know that may be seen as an unhealthy behavior, and to some extent, I sort of agree. You don't want to be like having a panic attack when you have carbs in something or whatever, unintentionally. But what I will say is, I mean, it does keep you away from the stuff that's not great for you. It definitely does. And so that's the pro to it. And that's exactly what it did. I was having nothing but meat, and I was trying to get, originally, at first I was actually having grass-fed steaks and ground beef and pastured eggs and pastured butter. So I was having like the ideal, right? I was doing that until Christmas. That's whenever I started to test my luck a little bit. A little before that too, but it was still with carnivore stuff. I was like, oh, how will dairy affect me? How will cheese affect me? Cheese didn't actually affect me that well in terms of the effects that it had on me. They weren't great in terms of my stomach problems. And so I was like, wow, that makes sense. I mean, that's congruous with what I say. I know that's a contentious thing to say in the carnivore space because technically dairy is carnivore, but my whole thing has never been about carnivore as a tribal ideology or something like that. It's always been about what is appropriate for us to be consuming. That was starting to be tested. I was testing things like pepperoni. How is that going to affect me? Something that's considered a processed meat, salami. Those didn't affect me that badly, but what I will say is that I don't get the same satiety signals from those meats as I do from regular meat, or regular meat, like appropriate, like ruminant meat. I actually will overdo it sometimes, and then I'll start to get really hot again. And I'll be like, I'm definitely overeating this. I'm eating way more than I need to. I'm not sure what that's about. It's actually pretty interesting, and I want to know why that is. But that's something that I am not the only one that reports that. Whenever I talked about it, more people were telling me the same thing. So I was like, huh, well, there's something there. But it didn't affect me negatively in flare-ups or anything like that with respect to those. So I started to have some small amounts of pepperoni, salami, some cheese, maybe. I was still doing great, all things, being considered. And then it was just whenever Christmas rolled around that month, I was pretty not great about that. But then I went right back to it. Nowadays, I mean, I'm still eating very strict. The only thing that I do now, and I'm desperately trying to stop doing it, I think that I started a habit that I shouldn't have started, is having homemade ice cream. I take some heavy cream, put it into a bowl, and I put some eggs in there and some salt and a little bit of sweetener, whatever, like erythritol, and some vanilla extract, and then I make ice cream. The problem that I have is, first of all, I don't like the idea of depending on a sweetener to actually have almost like pseudo sugary things. I don't think it's a healthy behavior. And also, even just the carbs and the overall dairy presence in general, I've noticed that doesn't affect me that well, and so I want to kick it. I've almost started like an addiction where I have it once a week. But that's still too much for me. I don't like the idea of that, so I'd like to kick it out. But other than that, I eat pastured eggs, I eat grass-fed ground beef, I eat steaks that are not grass-fed. That's just because I'm trying to save money, and I don't really think with ruminant animals, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It seems to be more of a deal when it comes to monogastric animals, and we don't really eat those. Just some water and added salt to taste slightly. That's it. That's all I eat now. Oh, and butter, grass-fed butter. Yes. The carnivore diet has allowed me to gain also about 10 more pounds, even without exercise. Before I was exercising, it allowed me to gain 10 more pounds than what was ostensibly muscle, because my body composition was changing for what seemed to be the better. I wasn't exercising, and it took about a year, but I started to gain after about a year of doing the carnivore diet, slowly up to 10 more pounds. Originally, I was eating pounds of food, and I still remained what people would consider underweight. Once I discovered Bart K was a professor, I started binging his other channel where he uploaded all of his previous videos that he took off of YouTube. So it was years worth of content, some of which were actual lectures that he doesn't really do anymore. And so what happened was, and this might sound odd, but I mean, it's just the way I think. I would watch his lectures and I'd watch his videos, and I had a Google Doc open and I would take notes. So everything that he was saying, I would take notes, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Then afterwards, I would treat it like a research paper. I'd take those bullet points and I'd write an entire paper. And then I'd go on to find citations for them. And then I put them in there with superscripts and stuff like that. And then not only that, I was doing it like 24/7, almost literally actually, because sometimes I would get so tired and I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up 8 hours later and his videos were still playing on autoplay. Like that was happening. And I was like, wow. So I was inundating myself with this, but I was writing paper after paper after paper about vitamin C, about fiber, about cholesterol and saturated fat and heart disease and all this stuff. I thought to myself, I was making an entire Google Drive folder, and I said, you know what? I said to my friend, who's now my girlfriend, I said, I kind of laughed. I said, I could write a book with this stuff. And she laughed too, because I was kind of being facetious, but then she laughed, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny though if I actually did that? So I went into my grandma's office and I went on the really big, like those thick iMac monitors. She had a really old one, and I turned it on, and I was like, hopefully it turns on. I don't know how. if this is pretty old, I don't know what's going to happen. I turn it on, and I actually went into the Word style app there, and I wrote my prologue that day for my now out book, Contraindicated, which is, of course, based off of, Bart's almost, one could say, excessive use of the word. But I thought it was actually a fitting title for it. I thought, well, I wrote the prologue. And so for the next 2 weeks, I spent 14 to 16 hours every day of those 2 weeks writing that book. Half of it was already written because of the papers I'd already written. The other half was what took me the longest. It was just linking stuff together. It was finding other citations. We worked together to get the book out the next year. But I thought that was it for me. I thought I was just going to write a book that was good for me. But then I keep watching Bart's videos, and my grandma listens in, and she goes, "What are you watching?" And I said, "Grandma, I don't know if you're going to like this guy. I'll tell you who he is, but I don't know if you want to watch." She said, no, put him on the TV. I said, okay, all right. So we put him on the TV, and she loves him. She thinks he's funny. She also starts to question everything that she knew before, or thought she knew, rather. I was like, oh, this is great. So I could actually watch it with her and not feel like I can actually like engage with family a little bit instead of being reclusive in my room. But then she said something weeks later. She goes, while we're watching a video, she goes, Eddie, you could do this stuff, right? And I said, no, I can't. Like this is impromptu. This is extemporaneous type stuff. And also he's been in the field of academia, or at least was, for like 20 plus years. I can't do that. I haven't looked at things long enough, whatever. So I call my dad that night because I was like, he's the voice of reason here. Like, I'm just going to ask him. Like, I was like, oh, listen to what my grandma said. She said that I could do this stuff that Bart does. And he goes, oh, yeah, no, she's right. Like, I've been thinking the exact same thing. And I said, what? And he goes, listen, I will invest $2,000 on equipment for you to start making videos like this if you start a channel up. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, I'll do it. And so, I mean, the lights that are on me right now, the desk I'm sitting at, that was all his money. He spent that money for me. When I went back home for a while, that's when I started practicing. So I did practice videos, and I did practice editing for 6 months, actually. And in the beginning of this year, I started up my channel. I started up my channel with the idea in mind that I was just going to talk about what I know. And then in the meantime, I'm going to be studying free college level courses. I mean, nowadays, everything is online. You don't have to actually pay to get this information. What you have to pay for is the certificate. And so I thought, well, I'll take the possibility that people won't take me seriously because I don't have a certificate, while also still learning all the stuff that these people with certificates learn, or in fact don't learn, actually, if they're not paying attention that much, or don't pass well, with good grades, because that often happens. I'll deal with that. During that time period, yes, I was making videos, but I also went through the entirety of a biochemistry course. I'm doing that with statistics and research methods now. I did that a little bit. I sort of took some pieces away from a bunch of other courses as well during that time. I'm not saying I'm never complacent. I haven't learned everything yet, but it's something that I've spent a lot of time. Like, for example, whenever I was looking at the biochemistry classes, I would do an entire research paper on an entire lesson. But I got the content vetted as well. So not only was I just looking at college level courses, I was getting it vetted by another professor that is awake to the propaganda that is taught a lot of times in these universities, especially today. And so I was really bolstering everything that I knew. I have been doing 48-hour dry fasts. It's the third week that I've done it. When I say dry, there's 1 glass of water in between that. And that's because there is a drink mix, the Cerule drink mix that I take, and I don't skip out on that. The reason I was doing that was because a lot of people will say that when you're on carnivore, and this is true to a large extent, but when you're on carnivore, you don't overeat and don't binge eat hardly ever. Your energy levels are stable and your hunger levels are therefore stable. Usually those are tightly intertwined. That is true. However, my job involves me being in very close proximity to the fridge. Even when you're carnivore, you still get dopamine hits from food. There's an evolutionary thing, or else, we could potentially die from just being indifferent to food. We have an appetite for food. And so what I started noticing was I was not eating when hungry. I was eating when I wasn't full. And I was like, that's not a good habit. I don't like that. I felt very compunctious, very guilty about it. I was like, you know what? I feel like a glutton still. And I was like, even if I'm not gaining fat, even if I'm not gaining a significant amount of weight, overeating beyond what is necessary for you is not something to strive for, not something to perpetuate, at least in my opinion. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, let me have a period of 48 hours where I don't eat anything and don't drink anything, sort of as a reset. And so that's what I've actually been doing. I was trying to do that for months. Maybe people know this. When you try and do things alone and no one is there to, like, you don't have a community to like work with you with it, holding yourself accountable doesn't work that well a lot of times. You're like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, no problem. I was starting my stopwatch, and then I was like, 24 hours would go by, and I go, well, I fasted for a day. Let me just eat. What happened was I got one friend. I tried to get one friend to do it with me. And now that I have a friend that does it with me, I started doing it. I was like, the mutual accountability that's there. That's why community is important. So now I've been doing 48 hours of effectively dry fasting. Yesterday, it was 49 hours and 45 minutes. So effectively 50 hours. And that's just because work interfered. And I'll tell you what, it's the best that I've ever felt. When I don't eat for that long, it's great. It's the first 2 weeks. I mean, it was difficult for me. And I think that was because, to put it into perspective, I'm 21 years old. And to go 48 hours without food for the first week, that was the first time I'd ever gone that long without food in my life for 21 years. Even if you're on a diet that allows you to fast for that long, it doesn't make it easy when it's your first time. This week was the easiest. That is something that I definitely do. In terms of things that are not directly related to diet, I mentioned this before, but I work out once a week actually. So I built 10 pounds of muscle since May or June of this year to now, just by working out once a week. And it's a full body workout every single week. And I use the X3 bar. Many people may have heard of that before. And then I use this pull-up bar that's actually sitting right next to me, or standing right next to me, for other things like, well, pull-ups, of course, but also leg lifts and push-ups on the bottom and stuff like that. So I don't actually lift static weights. I don't do that. Every time that I've tried to do that as someone with this condition, I've had major problems, major issues. And that makes sense considering people damage themselves a lot with static weights. I'm not saying that if you don't have my condition, still don't use static weights. I think that in our evolution, we didn't have bands and whatever. So we were lifting static things. But for me, that thing helps a lot. I have been using that once a week. Yeah, I think those are really the only other main things. I ground regularly with grounding mats. I used to get sunlight every day, but for the last month or so, it's winter now. Effectively, it's very cold. So not that much UV to be gained from going outside. And even so, I'm not going to go outside in 15-degree Fahrenheit weather. It's not really my thing. Well, there's a few. To find one that is the biggest takeaway from everything that I've gone through, that might take people by surprise, but I've actually really focused on things that I've learned from this intently. First of all, I think actually the biggest thing was everything is important to you until your health fails you. And then for the rest of your life, it will be the most important thing for you because nothing else matters if your health is horrific. Learning that at 17 at the time, especially 18 when it really hit me, when I was really debilitated, it's something that when you learn it, you go, man, I've been told this for my whole life, but why? And it's so like commonsensical. So why did I not believe it? Like, why did I not actually believe it? Because belief is represented in your actions, not what you say. Oftentimes when people say things that they quote unquote believe, like I believe this, what they're really saying is what they think they should believe and what an ideal belief is, not what they actually believe, because their actions are completely opposed to what that belief would make incumbent upon you to do. And so whenever it really failed me and I thought that I was going to die, and I absolutely was, they effectively told me that in doctor talk at the clinic. And that's what I wanted to hear, actually. When you learn that, you go, oh man, nothing is ever going to be as important to me. At the time, I never thought about any future in my life. You live in the moment when you're a kid. You think you're immortal when you're a kid. And when I say kid, I'm not even just talking about people younger than 18. I'm talking about in the way that people act. A lot of people want to, for example, they say that your 20s or something to embrace in the fact that, to just basically live in the moment, be hedonic and drink a bunch, whatever. Don't worry about anything till you're 30 or approaching 30. And it's like that idea may make sense to you and sound great to you when your health is in perfect order. And then when you're 30, it's like you hear people when they're 30 years old, they talk about it. They go, I wish I wouldn't have done that every time. And it's like, when are people going to learn? I think, unfortunately, it's an unfortunate fact of life that until people's health actually fails them, will they actually understand and adhere to that principle? Take care of yourself before, if you can't take care of yourself and you're not healthy, then first of all, you can't take care of anyone else, at least as effectively, but you also can't take anything else seriously. Like you can't, oh, you have a plan for your future? Well, that's never going to happen if you're unhealthy. You're never going to get there. It's not going to happen. So that was the most important thing that I've learned. But another thing that is a main one is this took me a long time to learn, but I was forced to learn it. If you can't control something, so if something is out of your control, don't let it bug you as much as you might be inclined to be bugged by it. Because if anything, it's like you being in shackles. In a way, you're shackled to that. It makes you feel very restricted. It restricts you a lot. When you are suffering from something, if you have done everything that you can and or are currently doing everything you can to fix it, as long as that is the case, don't let the consequences bug you. At least not as much. They're always going to bug you to some extent. That's just how life works. But don't tenaciously hold on to try and control for every variable that is completely out of your control. It is counterproductive. It is extremely distressing. Those two things being effectively synonymous. I mean, it's something that, once again, I think that in order for people to truly learn it and therefore implement it into their lives, they have to undergo a lot of suffering. And sometimes they still don't even learn that. It took me a long time to learn it. A long time. You just have to learn how to let go, you know? And that was another thing that I learned. And it's actually helped my perspective a lot. If I want something very badly, but I can't get it yet, and I'm doing everything I can to get it, then given that motto that I just elucidated there, it makes me far more patient with things. And I think it actually helps in the severity of my symptoms sometimes, because the more that you're stressed out like that, the more you're going to be tense, and it's going to affect you negatively in terms of your immune system, your health, and all that stuff. Unfortunately, it seems to be the case that people, when they hear that, they can't just magically implement it. They have to go through suffering. I wish that weren't the case, but it's sort of like when a child wants to put their hand on a hot stove. You know, if you keep putting their hand, like you keep doing that, eventually they're going to make the mistake anyway, and then that's when they learn from it. So it's an unfortunate fact of life, but those are the two main takeaways that I've learned from everything that I've gone through. Everything. When you go through that much suffering, if you don't consider that, first of all, your suffering is going to be a lot greater. But also, I'd almost argue that you're almost not suffering enough if you don't consider that. I thought about it for I still think about it to this day. In reality, what it has made me question, it sent me on this entire philosophical journey of like, first you start questioning, like, do I deserve what I'm going through? Is there some arbiter of the universe that is making this happen to me because I deserve it in some way? Is this punishment? A lot of people go down that route. Now, given my temperament, this might sound almost masochistic, but in a way, I think it actually saved me. Me thinking that I probably did deserve it because I was reflecting on my decisions in the past, which I won't get into, it actually made me get through it better, because if I thought that I deserved it, it didn't feel like it was meaningless suffering. The whole time, every time that I would have a symptom flare, like a really bad day, and all my days were bad, but if one was really bad and I thought that I was going to die, I was like, this is what's supposed to happen. And I thought, oh, it's for a reason. So again, I know that's like very dark and dismal, and it might sound masochistic, but that is the truth. And I think that actually saved me, because the worst kind of suffering is the kind of suffering you get when you feel like you did everything right. Oh, you almost know that you did everything right, and you still don't reap any benefits. In fact, you actually reap the worst.